All right, let's get right into it. When you think about the history of modern jazz piano, it's easy to picture a long line of amazing players, one after another. But what if I told you it's not really a line, but more like a tree, with all its branches growing from one single revolutionary seed? That seed, well, we're going to call it the source code. And today, we're going to trace that code from its very beginning all the way to where it's taken us. So, to kick things off, just check out this quote. I want you to picture the scene, okay? You're Fats Waller. You're not just a pianist, you're the man. You're a giant, a true master of the instrument. And you're in a club, doing your thing. When someone walks in, someone whose playing is so profound, so next level, that it makes you stop and say this, I mean, wow. Who on earth could make Fats Waller say something like that? So, who was this piano god? His name was Art Tatum. And you have to understand, Art Tatum wasn't just another great player in the lineup. No, he was a quantum leap, a fundamental shift in the universe of the piano. He is the source code we're talking about, the foundation for pretty much every single modern jazz pianist that followed. Okay, so let's dig into that source code itself. The man, the legend, Art Tatum. This guy didn't just play the piano better than anyone else. He basically rewrote the entire rulebook. He showed everyone what was actually possible on those 88 keys, and in doing so, he laid out the blueprint for decades of innovation to come. So what made Tatum so revolutionary? Well, you can kind of break his genius down into this, let's call it the Tatum Trinity. First, there was his virtuosity. And I don't just mean fast, I mean superhuman fast. We're talking about these blinding runs up and down the keyboard that were still somehow perfectly clean and clear. Second, and this is so important, he was a harmonic prophet. The guy was using chords and progressions that were literally 20 years ahead of their time. And third, he was a solo orchestra. You'd listen to him and swear there were 3 people playing. He made a single piano sound absolutely massive. And the effect he had on other musicians, it was just staggering. I mean, get this. The great Oscar Peterson, himself a technical monster, heard Tatum for the first time and was so completely floored that he reportedly didn't touch a piano for weeks. And then there's Charlie Parker, right? The father of bebop. You know how he learned his advanced harmony? He took a job washing dishes in a club for 3 months just so he could stand in the kitchen and listen to Art Tatum play every single night. That's the kind of impact we're talking about. So this all leads to what you could call the Tatum paradox. It's really fascinating. On one hand, his plan was this bottomless treasure chest, an endless library of ideas that future musicians could borrow and build upon. But on the other hand, his own personal style, his technique, it was so perfect, so complete that it was literally impossible to imitate. You just couldn't do it. You couldn't be Art Tatum. And so his perfection actually forced the next generation to find their own way. Which brings us right to that next generation and what I like to call the post-Tatum problem. You see, as bebop exploded onto the scene in the 40s, pianists were faced with a serious question. How do you take Tatum's dense orchestral genius and make it work in a fast, lean, small group setting? 2 absolute giants stepped up, and they came up with 2 very different solutions. Okay, so you've got 2 paths branching off from that same source code. On one side, you have Bud Powell. We'll call him the adapter. He took Tatum's insane speed, that right-hand virtuosity, stripped away some of the orchestral density, and turned it into these fiery, horn-like lines that became the absolute blueprint for bebop piano. Then, on the complete other side of the spectrum, you have Thelonious Monk, the deconstructor. He looked at Tatum's wall of sound and went the opposite way. He found his power in the notes that weren't played, in space, in silence, in weird angular dissonances. But wait. Here's the kicker. Thelonious Monk, right? Maybe the most unique, most original-sounding musician in jazz history. The guy who sounds like absolutely nobody else. Guess what? When he was young, he used to sound just like Art Tatum. No, seriously. It's just incredible proof that no matter how different the path, all roads lead back to that same source code. All right, so we've had the initial explosion of Tatum and the bebop reaction. But the piano's evolution was far from over. In fact, it was about to have another quantum leap moment, a second supernova who wasn't just going to change the technique, but the entire philosophy of the instrument. And his name was Bill Evans. What Bill Evans brought to the table was a complete paradigm shift. You know, if the story so far was all about this kind of extroverted virtuosity, this dazzling, look what I can do power, Evans turned the whole thing inward. For him, the piano became a tool for poetry. It was all about touch, about lyricism, about a deep, almost painfully beautiful introspection. It was a journey from the head to the heart. And his most revolutionary contribution might just be this concept right here, the trialogue. See, before Bill Evans, a piano trio was, well, it was a pianist and his rhythm section. The focus was on the piano. But Evans, along with his legendary trio with Scott LaFaro on bass and Paul Motian on drums, they changed that forever. They created a true three-way conversation, an interplay between equals. This wasn't just big for pianists, it totally liberated the bass and drums, and it set a brand new standard for what a piano trio could be. Okay, so now we're heading into the 60s and 70s, and this is where things just explode. The family tree starts to branch out in all these wild, unpredictable directions. You've got massive social upheaval, incredible musical exploration. It's a crazy time, and the piano is right there in the middle of it. The 60s gave us at least three totally distinct, powerful new directions. You had McCoy Tyner, who became the engine in John Coltrane's quartet, building this powerful, percussive style on these big open chords built in fourths. Then you had the incredible Herbie Hancock, who was this ultimate synthesizer, right? He took the harmonic beauty of Bill Evans and blended it seamlessly with a deep, earthy funk. And then you had Cecil Taylor, who just tore the whole thing apart and rebuilt the piano as an instrument of pure volcanic energy. And that fragmentation just got more intense as we moved into the 70s. It created this huge split in the piano world. On one side, you had the fusion movement. Guys like Herbie and Chick Corea were diving headfirst into electric keyboards, Fender Rhodes, synthesizers, you name it. But on the other side, there was this powerful counter-reaction, a massive acoustic revival, led by one guy who basically became the ultimate defender of the acoustic grand piano. And that man was Keith Jarrett. Just as everyone else was plugging in, he doubled down on the acoustic piano. And his solo concerts, my goodness, they were a monumental achievement, especially the famous Köln concert, which sold millions of copies. What Jarrett did in these concerts was basically synthesize the entire history we've just walked through. You could hear Tatum's virtuosity, Bill Evans's deep lyricism, the freedom of the avant-garde, all of it woven into one deeply personal, totally epic story. So that brings us closer to today, but the story doesn't just stop with Keith Jarrett, of course. This process of absorbing the past and creating something new, it's still happening. Today's great players are synthesizers, too, drawing from this entire rich history, but also looking way, way outside of jazz for inspiration. And you can see this perfectly in two of today's most important pianists. You've got Brad Mehldau, who clearly comes from that introspective, lyrical line of Bill Evans and Keith Jarrett, but he blends that with his deep knowledge of classical music and his love for bands like Radiohead. Then you have Robert Glasper, who's acting as this incredible cultural translator. He takes the DNA of jazz, especially that funky, harmonic vibe from Herbie Hancock, and fuses it directly with the language of hip-hop and the beats of producers like Jay Dilla. So if we take a step back and look at this whole story, you can almost see it flowing in three main streams, all starting from that same Art Tatum source. First, you have the lineage of power and technique. This is the direct line from Tatum's jaw-dropping virtuosity, adapted by Bud Powell for bebop, and then transformed into the thunderous, modal power of McCoy Tyner. Then you've got the second stream, the lineage of refinement and lyricism. This is where Tatum's incredible harmonic sophistication was filtered through the poetic, introspective soul of Bill Evans. And that path leads you right to the deep, complex explorations of a modern master like Brad Mehldau. And finally, the third stream, the lineage of individuality. This is for the true originals, the architects of sound. It starts with Tatum's own unique genius, which was then taken apart, examined, and put back together in a completely new way by Thelonious Monk. And that spirit continues today with artists like Jason Moran, who are always questioning what the piano even is and what it can do. And the most amazing part of this whole thing, it's not over, not by a long shot. I love this quote, "This history is not a closed book, but an unfolding scroll. It's a living, breathing story. New chapters are being added as we speak by a whole new generation of brilliant musicians." And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. If Art Tatum wrote that original source code all those years ago, what's the new code being written right now? What new sounds, what new ideas are being folded into this tradition? And what will this incredible instrument, with this amazing history, what will it sound like tomorrow? It's something to think about the next time you listen.